at the top of the hour. In the world this week, French cinema icon Gérard Depardieu was fed up of paying high taxes, so he moved to Belgium, or is planning to move to Belgium. Barack Obama became Time magazine's 2012 Person of the Year, and French President François Hollande tried to strike the right note with former colony Algeria. That's all coming up in the show. I've got some of the best journalists in town on set with me. We'll be getting their views and analysis. Our France 24 regular Craig Capitis, enjoying being called one of the best journalists in town. Your correspondent at large for Quartz and the Atlantic Group. We've got Anne-Elizabeth Moutet, another regular columnist for the Sunday Telegraph. Vivian Walt, contributor for Time magazine. You've got a lot to answer for this week. And Judah Grunstein is editor-in-chief of the World Politics Review. First, the aftermath of the Newtown school killings in Connecticut. One by one, the 20 children and 6 adults killed in Sandy Hook Elementary School last week were laid to rest. And the politics of gun control seemed to shift. Pro-gun politicians signaled that they were ready to accept some restrictions on assault rifles, on weapons, and Barack Obama signaled that he would make this one of his priorities in the coming weeks. Craig Capitis, you've got strong opinions on the Second Amendment, which of course is always the cornerstone of this, is always one of the central arguments about this gun control issue.
Yeah, well, if you have it on the screen, you might want to...
We're going to bring it up. Let's look at the Second Amendment and see how it's worded.
This is the beginning, middle, and end of every argument on gun control in the United States. It's 2 clauses, and the Second Amendment is the Gordian knot that no one can cut, even with an AK-47.
Okay, let's read it.
There you go. Okay, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be abridged. I think. Infringed, excuse me. There's 2 ways to look at that. Do you look at the first clause, that you have to be a member of the militia, to have a weapon? Or do you look at the second clause, which says the individual has a right to have a weapon? The courts have consistently sided with the second clause in that. And any attempt to regulate firearms in the United States always gets shut down by that second clause. Now, with over 300 million firearms in the United States, people aren't going to be giving their guns back. And I would go...
Well, there's no talk of giving the guns back.
Oh, yes, there is. The state of New York, yes, Governor Cuomo in New York just this morning.
That's an exception rather than the rule.
Well, but it also
Plus, I don't think the highest number of weapons are in the state of New York.
It's a state's issue according to the 10th Amendment. But the point of it is this. I would even go a bit further, and this is going to anger a lot of people. I don't think that anyone who hasn't fired a weapon, who understands weapons, can really cogently comment on this. Because if you know how to use a weapon, this is not Arnold Schwarzenegger movie time, you can take out a school with a handgun just as easily as you can with one of these semi-automatic weapons if no one is firing back.
Judah Grunstein, would you agree with this, that it doesn't matter if you take assault rifles out of the market, which is essentially what's being talked about right now, because you're still leaving handguns. That's what you're saying, Craig, right? You're still leaving handguns
and the guns that are and the assault rifles that are already out there.
And hunting rifles.
And hunting rifles.
No, there's no question that it's there are certain the difference that the assault rifles make are a difference in perception, in political perception, because they're so outrageously beyond any real hunting or sporting or even militia need in this day and age. That in the sense of that Second Amendment, they're not useful for protecting liberty or defending citizens against the state. They have no hunting or sporting use. So the reason they focus so much attention is because they're so outsized in terms of the political discussion that they make an easy target. But the truth is, yeah, there's the damage that's done, the damage that someone can do with firearms is not limited terribly by removing those from the pool. The thing is that the essential origin of that amendment is that the American Revolution started with state militias. The American Constitution and the American conception of government is how to best protect individuals from the state. It's something that's very poorly understood in Europe and in France in particular,
Absolutely.
because in France the state is given the mandate to protect individuals.
And we fear our neighbors in France. We trust the state and we don't trust our neighbors. And in America, it's the opposite.
Well,
But you know,
I wouldn't say that there's a huge trust in neighbors, but just to complete the thought, in America there's in American culture, in the political DNA of America, there's a distrust of the state, and everything in the Constitution is done to limit as much as possible the ability of the state to become tyrannical, and that includes the Second Amendment. Whether that's still necessary at this point in the country's evolution is debatable. Whether it's politically possible to do a whole lot about it is
Vivian, you wanted to jump in?
questionable.
well, just to follow up on something that Craig was saying, you know, New York has done gun buyback programs, as they call them, for years, for decades, in fact. And in fact, they have worked. And, you know, this sort of sense that, oh, well, nothing's going to work, I think is kind of a cop-out. And, in fact, with enough push, which is what New York did, with enough outrage and enough of a push from the very top, from the governor's office, things have really turned around quite dramatically in New York. It went along with a lot of other things, but you know, 20 years ago in New York City, you had 2,000 people a year being killed by guns, and you don't have that anymore. So if you take that as a kind of microcosm and you say, okay, this country is going to get truly outraged over the issue of guns, something could happen. The thing is, will they ever do that? And it seemed from that NRA press conference today that the answer to that is probably no.
Absolutely not.
And
The outrage, it seems, was there at least for a few days.
Well, the outrage is there, but at the same time, you're seeing NRA membership skyrocketing. You're seeing Walmart selling out of this Bushmaster weapon, which is essentially an M16.
Yeah, but is that indicative of the mood of the country? Because what that tells you, that's my opinion, what that tells us is that you've got a number of people who are diehard gun fans. They're going to stick to their guns, as it were, come what may.
Absolutely.
And so they're going to go and buy those weapons now. It doesn't mean that the country's mood as a whole isn't shifting. It means those people are just more entrenched.
Well, it still comes down to this Gordian knot. You have more than 300 million privately owned weapons in the United States. The only way to take those away from people is to either buybacks, which won't work across the country, or you amend the Second Amendment, and that's not going to happen.
But I don't think that such a thing as a buyback is the reason why gun crime was lowered dramatically in New York. I think it's got to do with other reforms that New York did. I think it's got to do with the zero tolerance policies that Giuliani and William Bratton enforced in New York. I think it has got to do with the extremely large population of people who are in jail in America, which is a cure and a problem at the same time. The guns are there as the means, but I think it's because the general atmosphere has changed that crime has gone down dramatically in New York. I don't think it was the buyback like cash for clunkers.
Let me just jump in, because in fact, violent crime and crime in general has gone down in the United States across the board in cities that have utilized implemented zero tolerance, and cities that haven't.
But gun massacres nationwide over the last 20, 30 years have gone up.
They've jumped around. They've gone up since the assault weapon ban was removed. But they're also
That was
so,
in 2004.
I believe. But they're also so rare that it's hard to separate the signal from the noise in terms of the statistics. And I think that, just to play the advocate a little bit, and I'm not a gun advocate. I'm not a gun owner. But first of all, the number 300 million always strikes me as somewhat suspect. But assuming there are 300 million guns privately owned in the United States, these kind of massacres are extremely rare.
Yes.
And they have to do with not necessarily the fact that the guns are so readily available, as the fact that a person, for whatever reason, snaps or is mentally ill. Whether the guns are not available, these people can do damage of another sort. There are illegal ways to get handguns. Someone who really is hell-bent on doing this kind of attack is going to do it. So I'm not sure. I think that focusing on this kind of massacres...
The counter-argument's easy. If you can't get your hands on a gun, then you're not going to do as much
Yeah,
damage.
But you can get your hands
you
on a
can
weapon.
This just doesn't happen as much in Europe, does it?
No,
it
of
happens,
Of course not.
as
Well,
much.
no, in Europe, there's a certain wisdom here that you don't need to be armed to the teeth.
There's an argument I want to run.
In the early 90s in New York City, you could get a handgun for $50 at a local Kentucky Fried Chicken.
If you go to Le Courneuve, you can get an AK-47 if you know the right people.
And even if you don't,
know
you
the
can.
right people. And Elizabeth Moutet, you can't go to Le Courneuve, which is a tough suburb of Paris, and get yourself a machine gun. You can't
I
do that.
can't, but I'm a journalist and I know somebody who can.
And it would take all of about 30 seconds on Google to find a recipe for a mass explosive device that doesn't utilize handguns at all, or even assault
the
weapons.
border and
There's an
drive
argument.
Texas.
Hold on. There's an argument.
What I'm trying to say is that there might be this copycat scenario of assault weapons and attacking schools like that. But if assault weapons weren't available, it could be a copycat method where someone is doing Timothy McVeigh type explosive devices.
The Oklahoma
The
vote.
thing is, I mean, I think that Cyril makes a good point, which is that aside from all the legal issues and how difficult it would be to take the guns off the street, etc., is the whole notion that guns are kind of an acceptable thing. I mean, look at these pictures we're showing here. People just simply going into stores and buying a gun. There has to, at some point, be a mental shift in which people say that is not okay.
It won't happen.
But you know, the one argument put forward by gun right advocates, and I'd like you to listen to a soundbite. It was filmed in the streets of Washington earlier this week, and this argument is that more guns actually could mean more security. Let's just listen to this one person that our correspondents in Washington met.
If there was one teacher or one principal armed that could have come in and ended the violence with one shot, could have saved dozens of children.
Hey, Craig, you're laughing, but essentially, hold on, the NRA is essentially saying something similar to this. It said, let's put a gun in every school and we'll have more security.
There's a lot of Looney Tuning on both sides. And this is classic Looney Tunes, because that just doesn't happen except maybe in a Sylvester Stallone movie.
But you know, I was doing a report on gun.
The proportion of guns per capita in Switzerland is as high as in the United States,
but
because
those are
everybody is in
single.
the
Those
army.
are single. Those are mostly hunting rifles or
No, they're army weapons. Because they're all
Swiss model.
volunteers.
And the Swiss model doesn't apply in the United States. When you look at what's happened over the past 24 hours alone, on the one hand, you have the NRA coming out and saying that they want to fund putting private cops, armed cops, in schools to guard children. I think that's pretty Looney Tune. You know, in kindergartens, elementary schools, high schools. The other thing that happened, which blew me away, was this company immediately came out and started making bulletproof backpacks for school children.
We have pictures of that, you know.
And
It's lucky you brought that up.
Not only,
and their revenue has increased 500% recently.
The site went down. And then the other thing that happened, America's largest maker of banana clips, the magazines that you slap in.
Oh, Craig, these are the backpacks. You've got an Avengers version for little boys, and you've got some Barbie doll version for little girls.
One of the smartest proposals that I've heard since this whole thing started was, don't regulate guns, regulate bullets. Make bullets hard to come by. Make people have to show what their use of bullets is, why they need them, and things like that.
It's the Gillette theory. You don't pay for the razor, you pay for the blade.
Exactly. And again, as always, it comes back to a Chris Rock routine, who said if bullets cost $5,000 each, there would be no innocent bystanders shot. There would
Guys, I got to move you on from the gun issue to this. This is the cover of this week's edition of Time magazine. Barack Obama on the cover, black and white picture there, because he's been named Time's 2012 Person of the Year. Vivian Walt, this question's for you. Yes. What has he done to deserve being named Person of the Year? Let me read some of the comments, or some of the reasons, rather, the rationale behind picking him. Barack Obama is not just a political figure, he's a cultural figure. He's the first president to embrace gay marriage and to offer work permits to many young undocumented immigrants. He managed to put together a winning coalition, and he's one of the first presidents to get 50% of the vote in consecutive elections, and he's more willing to risk his political capital now after this gun massacre for what he truly believes in. It honestly, to me, it seems a little wishy-washy.
Well, I will try to defend this.
Go.
Firstly, let's start off by saying, and I'm going to give you the company line here, this is not an award. It's not a prize. You know, persons of the year have included like Joseph Stalin and Adolf Hitler. It is somebody who's basically, you know, the most momentous figure of the past year.
And last year, if I remember correctly, it was the protesters of the Arab Spring, a collective non-award.
Which is rare,
It's his job
actually.
to win re-election.
Pardon?
He's president. He's a politician. It's his job to win re-election.
He's the first head
In
of state
some ways,
to win re-election
although
since the crisis.
If you read the article that he did with the editors, he would say that this year's election was a lot more significant than last year's, pardon me, 2008. Even though last time he was the first African American, he obviously smashed through a lot of barriers. This time he proved that it wasn't simply an anomaly. And so he is the person of the year essentially as a kind of figure for how much America has changed. He won, you know, with a fairly good margin, in fact, more than others predicted. Romney won about 60% of the white vote, exactly the same as Bush Sr. won.
He got the minorities, the Hispanics,
and yet he
the
got
Latinos.
Slammed.
All right,
Because
that's the company line. That's the company line. What's your line?
My line
Do you
is...
agree? Would you have voted for him? I'm assuming there's some kind of internal vote or conversation that goes on about this.
There's a lot of... I mean, the discussion starts, and I was, you know, in some of those early discussions, starts back in October, I guess, when people start trying to thrash through ideas.
Put the ideas out there. Real
and,
quick.
of course, there's several, not runners-up, but there's several other figures that almost made it as Person of the Year.
That girl from
All right,
Pakistan,
guys,
that
I'm going to have to stop you
15-year-old.
right here. We'll be back shortly, just after the break.